Okay.
All right, Jeff Mossa, you are the
Awesome.
production designer of the People versus O.J. Simpson. Tell us about how you recreated the trial of the century for network television.
Well, it all starts with the script. So we had, we have Larry and Scott wrote some amazing scripts, and it's all about research and then deciding what we wanted to bring to the table. Obviously, everybody's seen this trial, up, down, and sideways. They saw the footage. So I think the great thing about this script and the great thing is about Jeffrey Toobin's book is it shows you things that you've never seen before. So that was our task, was finding ways to show what everybody's seen in a way that nobody's seen before. There's a surprising amount of obviously footage and of the courtroom, but there's a surprising amount, a surprising lack of good visual research on things like the DA's office and Johnnie Cochran's house and that sort of thing. So we scouted the real DA's office. We did as much visual research as we could. They don't allow photography inside the criminal courts building, so that's really hard to come by. There's a few pieces online. We did get to scout the real thing. We took elements from that and ended up having to hire a researcher who I know who's really good at digging up little gems and finding little rabbit holes to go down. And that was our starting point, finding those little pieces and then expanding from there. And then always having the mantra that Ryan would say occasionally, but me and Nelson, the DP, would go back and forth, reminding ourselves that we're not always doing a documentary, we're doing a drama. And so the meter on where we decided to be 100% accurate and where we decided to take a little license waiver depending on where we were. So it was a very fun project. There was a lot of challenges to it. Fox did not want us to contact anybody involved in the project without their permission. So while it might have been easy, for instance, to go and try to contact some of the people in Johnnie Cochran's law firm, which still exists and is still in the same building, we weren't allowed to do that. So in the place of that, what we often did with that was we knew the location. I had one picture, I think, of Johnny's office taken from one angle. So I found myself looking in that picture. There's some very reflective cabinets. I found myself looking in reflections to try to find out what else was going on in there. We also scouted the building that he's in. We just looked a couple of floors down. We were able to get in there and sort of get a feel for what the textures of the building were, what the layout were, and that was kind of the tact we took with a lot of things. And then we just built it from there, filled in the gaps we needed, and built from there.
Let's talk a bit about some of the sets in there too. Obviously, the bulk of this show takes place in a courtroom. So how did you make that visually interesting? You talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I would love to say that it was all me that made that courtroom visually interesting. But you're dealing with something that existed and something that was real, and that was one of those things that we had to get dead on because everybody's seen it so much. What's great about that is when we scouted the DA's office, which is in the same building as the courthouse, we had somebody guiding us through the DA's office, and she was a little reluctantly cooperative. And once we were done with her, she told us the courtrooms are down on the 9th floor. So we went into the 9th floor, which of course anybody in the public can go into, and actually went into the courtroom. Now, there was nothing going on in that courtroom at the time, and there was one clerk in there, and you're not supposed to take any photos or anything in there, but I asked her very politely, and she was very kind, and I spent about 45 minutes inside that courtroom taking as many pictures and measurements as I could, and the bulk of it has not changed. Now, they changed the carpet in there. Obviously, they have some newer computers in there. So, I mean, on the surface of just recreating the courtroom, it's obviously, it's a craft to recreate it in such good detail. We had a really good team that did that. I think walking into the courtroom myself the first time, it is a lot more interesting of a space than we saw. You know, the video coverage in the 90s was sort of this grainy Betacam video coverage. It just kind of looked like a brown box. There is some more architectural interest going on in that room, so we duplicated it. And the other half of that is there's details of that room that you never saw because the camera was only allowed to look in certain directions. Specifically the ceiling, and that was something that was very graphic, and when you walk into that room, it's all encompassing. So I was very, very pleased and happy the entire run of the show with the way that Nelson the DP and Ryan and John and Anthony were shooting every set. I find it impressive with the amount of shooting that we did in the courtroom that I think right up until episode 10, they found new ways to shoot it. And oftentimes they were shooting with 4 cameras. I mean, we obviously had to make the set, we built the set in such a way that we could pull walls away to get interesting and new camera angles. So the courtroom that we built is almost identical to the real thing. I stretched it by about 6 feet because it is a lot smaller than everybody realizes, and we wanted to give the actors a little bit more space. But really, sort of the visual dynamic of how we shot it, I have to really give the credit to the directors and Nelson, and they really did show that courtroom in a way that we've never seen it. And I think that obviously we didn't spend as much time in the courtroom in our show as you saw during the trial, but we did still spend a significant amount of time in there. You know, I think when the crew and the directors, Anthony Hemingway was the first one to shoot in there, everybody was really excited. You know, everybody was really, really excited to be in that set, especially when you see all the cast come in costume and they look so good. By episode 10, trust me, nobody wanted to be in that room.
How about OJ's home? Big, lavish house in Brentwood. Talk about recreating that.
Yeah, so that was interesting. You know, that was one of the first things that we looked for. And I was really convinced just by breaking down the scripts and what we were going to need that we were never going to find, because of course the real one was raised, but when it was sold, I was convinced that we were never going to find a single location that really gave us everything we needed. And my hat's off to John Agolia, our location manager, who pretty early on found this house in Beverly Hills that was the same style, had a lot of the similar tones in it, and really had a lot of the elements we needed. And inside and out, it had the turnaround driveway. We took off their metal gates. We built duplicates of OJ's gates, and we put them on their real motors and left them there. We actually shot that location over probably over the course of about 2.5 months on a few different occasions. I think we went there a total of 10 days. And so the first time we went in, we changed those gates and we left them there, and we took them off and replaced them when we were done. So we had to change the gates. We obviously had to sculpt and create this statue that he had in his backyard. But this location was pretty amazing. Obviously, we had to do some work on the decor, but it had a lot of the elements. And the one thing it really didn't have, it had the guest house, but it didn't have the alleyway, you know, outside where Cato heard the noise and where the glove was. But it did have a driveway alongside the guest house. So we were actually able to kind of construct that alleyway there. So I believe we really lucked out. I thought we were going to end up in 2 or 3 different houses in order to make it look right. From that point on, it was just a matter of, you know, the statue, the gates, building that alley, and really just sort of switching out and changing some of the decor. We actually did use some of the current owners' furnishings in that house.
One of the things that I really loved about this show, I mean, it's about so many things. One of the things it's about is America's class system, the differences in economic classes. And you really see that in the set designs. You know, you contrast Marcia Clark's home with Johnnie Cochran's home, or OJ's home with his fans' home, or the DA's office with Johnnie Cochran's office. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. That was actually something that I enjoyed a lot about the show as well. And I think while we were working on it, that along with all of the police brutality that was going on in the news, I mean, there are a lot of current modern day news items that just felt like, as we were making this, it's like, wow, part of me felt like, wow, we haven't come anywhere in 20 years, you know?
Yeah.
But again, I mean, all of that stuff goes back down to the research. In scouting the DA's office, that criminal courts building, not a lot has changed in there, and not a lot has changed in the DA's office. You really get a sense of it. So we were able to take those elements from that office. Our sets, we had to make them a little bit more cinematic than the real thing. We couldn't copy that exactly because it wouldn't have played well. But we took all those architectural elements. We did sort of fill in more gaps, I think, with Johnny's office and the look there, because we had very little research there. And with Robert Shapiro's, same thing, we had very little research there. I found myself even going to reading through texts. There's so many people who wrote about this to just get a sense of the visuals. You know, in the Kardashian house, we couldn't find anything other than he did an interview with Barbara Walters, and so there was some footage from that, but it was very, very sparse. So I found myself reading through text to really get a sense of it. And obviously, we, you know, in talking with Jeffrey Toobin as well, because he was available to us, had a good sense of who these people were. And it really did, that was a real fun part to define. I mean, that's always the fun part of what we do, no matter what it is. Mm-hmm. But in a world where we usually work on stuff that's completely fictitious, you're defining the characters that way. This, having real people involved who we weren't allowed to contact, it was a lot of fun to just find those elements to really help define the style of all of these people and their class. And, you know, specifically, I think, you know, for Marcia, all we had some video footage of her coming out of her house in a very foul mood, and the media was kind of yelling at her, and she was really kind of nasty to them. And then she got in her car. My location manager was able to find out where her house was. So we had a sense of her neighborhood, and it really, in that way, kind of defined itself. I mean, we knew where Johnnie lived. We knew where Marcia lived. We had a tough time finding exactly where Robert Shapiro lived. We eventually found an address we believed to be his, but we weren't 100% sure. So that really gave us a good stepping stone to work from. But yeah, I think you're right. It is really well defined, and I think it's all crafts. I mean, yes, it showed up in the sets, but it showed up in the costumes. It showed up in the hair and makeup. And I think all of the elements came together really well. And even down to the cinematography, Nelson did a great job.
Yeah, I mean, you really do get a sense of who these people are very early on by the way they dress and the places that they live and the places that they work. I mean, I think about like Marcia Clark serving her kids breakfast in this cramped little kitchen, and then you contrast that with Johnnie Cochran in this huge walk-in closet where he's got all of his clothing and
right.
Yeah.
No, that's actually funny that you bring that up, because that's the one thing that's come back around a few times, and people have asked, does he really have that closet? And actually, you know, it was very early on in that script, and that was I walked right down into the writer's office, because they wrote it with this, you know, dry cleaner style rotisserie of clothing, and I walked right down in the writer's office and said, was this in the book? Is this real? And that was something that they decided to take license with. They're like, we don't know if it was real, but we imagine it to be so, and we think it'd be great. So a lot of people like that scene. And I do think it's a great way to, I mean, that's really how we introduced him, right? I mean, we introduced him inside that closet, having that dialogue with his wife. And I think that was the first time you saw his house at all. I mean, we see his living room, we see his home office, we see his bedroom, but that first thing you see is the closet, and you already have a sense of the architecture and his style, and then you see those suits flying by. You know, I don't think anybody who watched the trial would question that Johnnie Cochran might have that closet. You know, I mean, it just. And I credit Scott and Larry for that, because that's whether or not he had something like that, it's kind of perfect for the character.
It really is. You know, this show is so great. It's it's really sparked a lot of conversation on
Mm-hmm.
on a wide range of subjects. You know, racism, the criminal justice system, sex, politics. You know, it's a very rich rich program about something that, you know, you'd think on the surface would be a little trashy and tabloidy, you know,
Right.
because can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, well, that's exactly was my first impression when Chip Vucelich was the line producer, and he's somebody I've worked with a couple of times in the past. And when he initially brought up the project, because he was on it, I think he was brought in probably 2 or 3 months at least before we'd started production, and I had run into him on the Paramount lot. He was having a meeting with Ryan because Ryan was still at the Paramount lot there at the time, and I was working on some additional photography for the latest Terminator movie, and he was telling me about it, and my first reaction was, really? Do we have to go through that tabloid? Do we have to relive that tabloid? I mean, because there is a terrible tabloid version of this to be done, right? And the first thing he said to me was like, no, you have to, the book that I've read the whole book that it's based on, he said, and it's fantastic, and it's from the lawyer's point of view, and you're following the lawyers, and it's a completely different point of view, and it's showing you stuff you've never seen before, and it's fascinating. And I said, okay. And I remember that day meeting, sort of crossing paths with him on the lot, and I sort of said, okay. And I sort of half-hearted, okay, you know, like, yeah, okay. And then as he got deeper into it and he called me about it more, and he said, let me just send you the first 2 scripts. And I said, fine. So, you know, the minute I read the first 2 scripts, I was hooked. I was a little worried because it was so big and they were so good, and it was really, the first 2 scripts read like a 3-hour movie, not like episodic television. So from the standpoint of how are we going to produce this in the way that the usual television machine works, I think we ended up doing the really good job of that. And I think that we ended up doing it in a, not only it started with the writing and the directing was really good, but not only did all of that come together, but I really feel like we shot the show and we presented this show more cinematically than I think you see a lot of television shows do. And I think that's a lot of, having done enough television at this point in time, I think you can start to see some shows, they start out with good cinematic scope, and then eventually to some point they become this, you know, and a lot of that is a product of, you know, it's a product of practicality, it's a product of money, it's a product of time and schedule and all of that stuff. And I don't feel like that was ever sacrificed here, which I think went a long way to helping that storytelling.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, and congratulations. It's a great show, and
My pleasure.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, it's good talking to you.
Nice talking to you too. Have a great day.
You too.